January 16, 2025, David Lynch died. I haven't said anything publicly about how that hit me. It hit me harder than the death of probably any celebrity in my lifetime. I guess when Bruce Springsteen dies, that's a long time from now, I'll feel as devastated as I felt when I heard the news of David Lynch passing. I would not be a writer. I would probably not be a great lover of literature and film. I would certainly not be the person I am, someone who is attuned to irony and strangeness, if it were not for David Lynch. No artist has influenced me more. Again, not just as a writer, a creator, a kind of artist myself, but also my way of inhabiting the world, aesthetically and ethically. I guess you could say David Lynch has influenced me. Here's my David Lynch origin story. It's fall of 1986. I was in college. I would have been a sophomore in college. I came from a small town in North Carolina, very much like the Lumberton of Blue Velvet. Small, conservative, homogenous. And for various reasons, I was trying to break out of that mold in college, as a lot of people do. Not only was I from this very small town with Rockwellian aspirations, my dad was the head football coach of the local high school football team, and I was a football player. I played quarterback for my dad. So you can't get any squarer than that, any more conformist than that, any safer than that in forging an identity. So I'm in college and I'm exploring new ways to think about the world. I'm taking a philosophy class. It's a class on 20th century philosophy. So we're reading people like Sartre and Camus. It's a very stereotypical story of the young person who reads these existentialists and suddenly feels that his comfortable world is cracking. There was this one dude in the class, I don't remember his name, but he was the cool counterculture guy, the guy I admired. He dressed in black, and he was witty and sarcastic, and he was very smart, and all the cool gothy women were interested in him. He had everything I wanted at that time. Of course, now I realize this guy was a total cliche too, kind of a proto-emo. But in this philosophy class, he mentioned the film Blue Velvet. I'd never heard of it. I'd grown up watching big Hollywood studio films starring Bruce Willis and Sylvester Stallone, people like that, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I had no sense of art cinema at all. I had no clue about the new Hollywood of the 70s, for instance. I'd never seen a Scorsese film. I'd never seen a Coppola film. So this guy mentions Blue Velvet, and he talks about it in class as the most brilliant film he's ever seen. So I think, well, I want to see this film. So I start looking around for it. It's nowhere to be found. And finally, I learned from my girlfriend at the time that it's playing in Charlotte in North Carolina, which is pretty far from where I'm going to school. So I go there by myself on a Saturday, drive there, and I start watching this movie. And the first thing I thought was, you mean you can do this? This can happen? You know the film. It's almost every scene, there's this deep unease, where on the one hand, clearly this film is a parody of a kind of small town superficiality, manifested by the kind of gee whizness of the Jeffrey Beaumont character. But at the same time, there's a feeling that, of course, under the surface of this is something terrifying, like the insects we see at the very beginning of the poem. So really from the beginning, what causes the unease is the emphasis on conformity and comfort. It's not as if this is different from the unease. It's as if it somehow is the unease. In other words, I'd never felt before while watching a film two opposing emotions at the same time, not knowing if one or the other had more validity than the other. Then, of course, Frank comes along with that violence, that strange violence, so strange, and it's macabre, and it's almost sublime. Frank is horrifying, but yet you can't stop watching Frank. Frank is one of the weirdest characters you've ever seen, but also he's totally familiar to you at the same time. What I'm talking about is really encapsulated by the scene where Jeffrey has seen Frank's horrific violence toward Dorothy, and he's sitting in the car with Sandy, played by Laura Dern. Of course, Jeffrey Beaumont's played by Kyle MacLachlan. And Sandy is saying, "Oh, I had a dream. I dreamed of the robins. The world was terrible. Then the robins came back and everything was fine. And they're sitting by a church, and you can hear the organ of the church playing." And her description of her dream is so saccharine, so sentimental. It's so artificial. It's so obviously cinematic. It feels cheesy. It feels ridiculous. I felt like, well, I should be laughing at this. And of course, at the end, she's crying. Jeffrey says, "You're a neat girl." And again, nothing could be more gee whiz cheesy than that. This is ridiculous. Clearly, this film is mocking these two young people for being so shallow. But there's also something profoundly moving about Sandy's description of this dream. It is beautiful to think about the robins, and Laura Dern's acting is so present and emotional, and Kyle MacLachlan is so vulnerable that I also felt the scene is profound, beautiful, moving. So again, I'm like pulled apart. This is ridiculous. This is sublime. But then I'm like slammed back together again, where I have to think, what's the relationship between the ridiculous and the sublime? They're not different here. They're somehow the same, but they're not the same. So that sense of uncanniness, of feeling familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, feeling both at home and not at home at the same time, really struck me in that scene. And that was my opening to Lynch. It got me aware of doubleness and irony and paradox. But those are fancy intellectual terms. It goes deeper than that. Just how the heart, the human heart, at its core is messy and contorted, but yet in a way most vital when most messy, when messiest, and most contorted. And you can think of other great moments in Lynch cinema where this blurring of the ridiculous and the sublime comes together, or not, they blur, the ridiculous and the sublime blur together. The most prominent scene would be from Mulholland Drive, when the Naomi Watts character, Betty, gives her audition. She walks into the audition room. Again, all these very unseemly, like fake Hollywood types are asking her to audition for what will probably be a really awful film. High melodrama with an aged out actor playing the lead, playing along with a young woman. So it's just creepy, cringy scene. And you know already that Betty's a terrible actress because she's already run some lines and she's just not good. But then suddenly in this audition, something happens. She comes to life, and there's an intensity and a realness that is terrifying and beautiful to her audition. how does that happen? And how can something go from so cringy to so powerful just like that? And it was a bit like the Robin scene in Blue Velvet, where I didn't know how to feel. But this confusion wasn't debilitating or frustrating. It was the opposite. There was a feeling like this is what life is at its most intense, is this feeling of not knowing, but the not knowing being a kind of openness to possibility. Knowingness can shut down possibility, but the not knowing how to feel opens you up to a kind of field of possibility. In Inland Empire, characters talk about a distinction between the marketplace and the palace. The marketplace is the world of control and commerce and causality, and whereas the palace, you have to go through the alleyway, the dark alleyway, to get there. You have to go to the place where you don't know, the place that's off the map. And when you do that, you can open up to something else. In Lynch, there's always a sense of something elseness. But to get there, you have to go through contortions and pains and strangeness, confusion. Now, some of this is possibly tied in with Lynch's interest in TM, but we don't need that. So I'll just say that Lynch, strangely enough, this surreal avant-garde director, showed me what it was like to be alive. Not only my existence, but also gave me artistic standards to strive toward. Now, I'm not saying my writing approaches David Lynch's art at all, but I'm saying my interests and my aspirations are Lynchian. And the books that I've written in the past 15 years have been my effort to explore these Lynchian experiences and these Lynchian ideas. And my most recent project, a biography of Walt Whitman, is in a way grew out of a realization that in some ways Walt Whitman is kind of the Lynch of his time. The way that he's trying to take very ordinary American experience and make it curious and odd, and open up his readers to possibility, not by saying, here, look at this, but by saying, where we are now is much stranger than you had imagined. And to go into the strangeness, it's that will open you up to possibility, to get to that sense that the world is ineradicably, irreducibly strange. And our plight is a kind of chronic not knowingness. And to say yes to that is not to yield, become paralyzed, but to say, what else is there then? What else is there? And open to that. The sublime and the ridiculous are near of kin always. So I miss David Lynch deeply. Since he passed, I've rewatched almost everything, and I'm just stunned at how good everything is. But I have to say that Twin Peaks: The Return, I saw it when it came out, and it moved me, but now I think it might be his greatest work. It might be the greatest work in 21st century cinema, if not American cinema. It's essentially an 18-hour odd film that has everything.